Bless you. All right, so our first term today is in market failure. And so we've talked about how great market economies are, and we've talked about the price system. And when the price system is allowed to work, it's kind of a special thing because it doesn't really take any instruction or any leadership or any guidance. It's a bunch of individuals answering questions and making decisions in their own best interest. And as a whole in society, we all benefit from that. And so that's a great thing, but also markets fail sometimes. It's not a perfect system. And so market failure is anytime there's an inefficient distribution of goods and services in a free market. And what that means is that the market has failed to supply enough of a product, a good or service. Or maybe they supply too much of it. Or maybe they're just not going to provide it or supply it at all. And when that happens, the government has to step in. And so think about some things that the free market would not supply or provide us with. Roads is a big one. Schools is probably another one. Now, there are private schools out there that charge tuition, but do you think that there would be enough schools? Probably not. And so without the government stepping in and providing some things that we call public goods, and those are goods and services made available to all members of society, we would have to go without those things. And there's two real categories or characteristics of public goods. And so one is that there's non-exclusion. That means everyone can use it. It doesn't exclude anyone. So whether you pay your taxes or not, you can use these public goods. And so whether you're help paying for them or not, you can still use it. And so if you're an illegal immigrant, you can still use these public goods because they're for everybody. And then the next characteristic is shared consumption. And so what that means is it's not a zero balanced game. That means that if one person uses this public good, it does not mean that another person cannot use it. And so if one person walks under a street lamp and uses that street lamp for light, that doesn't mean that the next person can't use it, right? It's for everyone. And so some examples: clean air, national defense, lighthouses, public parks, street lamps. And so the real question isn't whether the government should provide these public goods, it's how much tax revenue the government should collect, and then which of these public goods they should actually provide. And so it's common knowledge that they should provide some, but which ones and how much tax revenue should they actually collect? Another place where the market is failing is the market fails to measure something called externalities. Externalities sounds like the word external. And so an externality is going to be a benefit or a cost that a third party receives. And so the example of the bicycles in Winchester, if you decide to ride your bike instead of driving around, you're creating a positive externality for other people in Winchester because there would be less pollution. Maybe less noise would be another positive externality. And markets don't judge this, or they don't measure it. And so sometimes the government steps in and kind of adjusts the cost or the benefit of an action. And so let's say that the government they've recognized that there's a social benefit to an action, there's a positive externality, and so the government decides to give a subsidy for that action. And that's a benefit, usually a monetary benefit, so money given by the government to an individual or business. And usually I don't compare myself to old people. This is how I feel around Christmas time, is how the comic is here. So all my neighbors do up their house and Christmas lights, and it's all fancy, and I think it's great. I don't do any of that to my house, but I get to see all their great Christmas lights. I do have a Christmas tree. It's kind of small though. I would say medium sized. It's like this tall. From the ground. I'm taller than my Christmas tree. Yeah, that's what I think too. And so you think of these positive externalities. If I take some Axe, sorry, or you're welcome, I don't know. And I spray it on myself. That's okay. That would be a negative externality. All right. And so if you're allergic or if you don't like the smell of this, that's a negative externality. If it smells good, that's a positive externality to you, right? I'm the one using it. You're a third party, but you're still affected by it one way or another. That's an externality. Like secondhand smoke will be a negative externality. Nice. All right, and so that was some Axe, and here's an Axe commercial if you don't believe me. So I was staring at the door during that because I thought when I was supposed to spray that, women were supposed to come in here, but nobody did, so it didn't work. So what was the positive? Who received the positive externality here in this commercial? Well, there's one person who used it. And so if they use it, are they receiving the externality? No, all right? It has to be external people. It has to be the third party. And so the first guy came in and sprayed on himself, and then he left the elevator. So he didn't receive the externality. The second guy, the guy that walked in the elevator, he received the positive externality and then the negative externality. Sure. And so we can show this on a graph. And the first point I want you to see is market equilibrium. All right, market equilibrium's there. And we have a demand curve. Do you see the demand curve? What color is it? Can you tell? I think the demand curve is green, right? How do you know? Because it slopes down. And then the supply curve is blue because it's sloping up. And those could also be the benefits and the cost. All right. And so those curves could be the benefit and cost also. And so market would measure a product at market equilibrium. But let's say there's a product like a vaccine, a flu vaccine. We'll say that. Is there a social benefit and a positive externality to you getting a flu vaccine? If you don't get the flu, what's the positive benefit for those around you? You can't spread the flu, right? And so the government recognizes this. And so they say that the benefit, the social benefit of receiving a flu vaccine is greater than the market benefit. And so what they do is they create a subsidy. And what that subsidy does is that helps people pay for those vaccines. It makes it cheaper. And so that pushes that demand curve to the right. And so instead of having this quantity, stop popping up there, quantity 1 down here, as soon as this thing goes away, sorry. Instead of having quantity 1 amount of vaccines, we have quantity 2, which is greater. We have more of it because it's creating a social benefit that is greater than the market benefit. So that's a positive externality making that happen. Now, there's also negative externalities. So the negative effect an activity imposes on an unrelated third party. So if I finally go out and I get my dream monster truck, all right, my neighbors aren't going to like that. It's going to be loud. It's going to be producing more pollution than my Honda Civic. All right, and so they would be receiving the negative externalities of my action. And so the government may step in and try to correct or at least try to disincentivize the actions that create a negative externality. And so they might impose an excise tax, a tax on manufacturer sales select items like liquor, like gasoline, like tobacco. So think about what's the negative externality of cigarettes. Okay, they stink. Secondhand smoke, lung cancer, types of cancer, to where that increases all of our healthcare costs. And so there's lots of externalities to smoking. And so that's why they put a special tax on it to try to keep fewer people from, make it so fewer people are smoking. And so if we look at a externality, what they're trying to do is they're trying to, again, change the quantity. And the increase in tax is an increase in cost. And so that would push a supply curve to the left, decreasing supply. And so instead of having quantity 1 amount of cigarettes out there, we end up with quantity 2, which is less of it. Now, in both of these examples of how we try to measure and to adjust to positive and negative externalities, the government steps in. And so this also leads to government failure when the cost of intervention outweighs the benefits. And so maybe the government steps in and they're not doing it for all of society, but they're making decisions based on their political self-interest, or they're influenced by lobbyists, which is a group of people who are out to achieve their own agenda. Maybe they're just out looking for a quick fix. And so if traffic is congested in an area, maybe the government steps in and they say, oh, we'll widen the road. Well, widen the road isn't really as good as adding another lane would be. And so it's not going to fix congestion in traffic very much, but they went for a quick fix instead. A lot of times it could be based on the lack of information that the government has. If they don't have all the info, it'd be hard for them to measure what the social benefit or social cost of an action is. All right, so you have an assignment on Google Classroom. And in that assignment, I'm going to ask you to be a little creative. And you're going to create a texting conversation between two people about a positive or negative externality that's happening.